Everyone in that room believed the Korean Mafia king was untouchable. His enemies feared him. His men protected him. His empire stretched from Incheon to Tokyo. But the most dangerous thing at that table wasn't sitting across from him. It was the dinner he trusted, and the black assistant who decided not to stay silent. One move. No warning. No permission. No second chance. And when the wrong man collapsed, everything changed. This is the story of Park Dae-hyun, the Mafia king who thought he controlled everything. And Naomi Brooks, the woman who made one move that no one saw coming. If you're still watching right now, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. Subscribe to our channel for stories that can make you smile, and can also make you cry for absolute strangers. Now, let's get into the story. Park Dae-hyun didn't need to raise his voice to command a room. At 43, he had built an empire that stretched from the port warehouses of Incheon to the nightclubs of Tokyo, and everyone who sat at his table knew exactly what silence meant. Respect. Fear. Survival. The private dining room on the 7th floor of the Jade Pearl restaurant was reserved every third Friday. Same time, same security detail outside, same rule that had kept him alive for 20 years. No one touches what's his. Not his territory. Not his money. And certainly not his plate. The dinner was a formality. 5 men, all lieutenants in his organization, each one vetted, each one loyal, or smart enough to appear that way. They spoke in low tones about shipments, payments, territories that needed reminding. Park listened more than he spoke. That's what power looked like. The ability to let others fill the silence while you decided their fate. Naomi Brooks stood near the back wall, tablet in hand, invisible by design. She had been Park's executive assistant for 2 years, handling schedules, logistics, travel arrangements. She was American, black, fluent in Korean, and exceptionally good at being exactly where she needed to be without being noticed. In a world where women were rarely seen and foreign women even less, she had learned that survival meant blending into the furniture. No one at that table looked at her. No one asked her opinion. No one expected her to matter. But Naomi had learned something in 2 years of standing in rooms like this. Power wasn't just about who spoke. It was about who paid attention. And tonight, she was paying very close attention. Because something was wrong. Something small. Something no one else had noticed yet. Naomi Brooks wasn't supposed to be in South Korea. 3 years ago, she had been working private security in Los Angeles. Close protection for high-net-worth clients who paid well for discretion and didn't ask questions about her military background. She had seen enough to know when a room felt wrong. When timing was off. When someone was performing loyalty instead of living it. Those instincts had kept her alive in places where hesitation meant body bags. But after a contract went sideways and a client ended up dead despite her best efforts, she needed distance. New country. New work. New rules. Park Dae-hyun's organization didn't hire women for security, but they needed someone who could move between worlds, handle English-speaking contacts, coordinate international logistics, and keep their operations invisible to the wrong eyes. Naomi fit. And more importantly, she knew when to be silent. Her role was simple. Confirm reservations. Track schedules. Ensure Park's movements stayed predictable only to those who needed to know. She had learned quickly that in this world, being underestimated was an advantage. Men like the ones at this table looked past her because they couldn't imagine she mattered. And that's exactly why she saw things they missed. Tonight she had confirmed the menu 3 days ago. The Jade Pearl's head chef, Mr. Kang, always followed protocol, courses prepared in sequence, specific plating, specific timing. But when the second course arrived, Naomi's eyes caught something wrong. The garnish on Park's dish. It was positioned differently. Not wrong enough to be obvious. Just wrong enough to matter. The server who placed it down had hesitated, just a fraction of a second, before stepping back. And when Naomi looked at his hands, she noticed they were trembling. That wasn't nerves. That was fear. And fear in this room meant one thing. Someone had made a choice they couldn't take back. The dish was braised abalone with ginseng reduction. Naomi knew this because she had reviewed the menu personally with Mr. Kong on Tuesday. 8 courses. Each one approved by Park's security team, each ingredient sourced from verified suppliers, each plate prepared under watch. But the dish that arrived in front of Park Dae-hyun wasn't the one they had finalized. The microgreens were different. Instead of perilla leaves, there were chrysanthemum petals scattered across the top. A small change. The kind of substitution a chef might make if an ingredient wasn't available. Except Mr. Kong never made substitutions without approval. Never. Naomi's eyes tracked the server as he stepped back from the table. Young, maybe mid-20s, wearing the standard jade pearl uniform, black vest, white shirt, hands clasped in front. But his movements were too careful. Too deliberate. Like someone trying not to make a mistake. His eyes didn't meet Park's. Didn't meet anyone's. And when he turned to leave, Naomi saw it. A faint sheen of sweat along his hairline. It was 60 degrees in this room. No one should be sweating. Park lifted his chopsticks, paused, then set them down again. One of his lieutenants, a man named Choi, asked him a question about a shipment delay in Busan. Park answered, his tone even, unbothered. But Naomi noticed the way he shifted slightly in his seat. The way his hand moved to his jaw, just briefly, as if testing for discomfort. It could have been nothing. A long day. Tension from negotiations. Except Park didn't show discomfort. Ever. That's what made him untouchable. Control. And right now, something was wrong with his control. Naomi's mind flashed back to a night in Los Angeles, 4 years ago. A client dinner at a private estate in Malibu. She had been standing post near the kitchen entrance when she noticed the catering assistant acting the same way. Too still, too careful, eyes avoiding contact. She had flagged it to her team lead, who dismissed it as nerves. 2 hours later, her client was in the hospital with arsenic poisoning. Non-lethal dose, but enough to send a message. The assistant had disappeared before anyone could question him. Naomi had learned that night that the most dangerous threats don't announce themselves. They come quiet. Polite. Hidden in details so small that noticing them feels like paranoia. But paranoia kept people alive. And right now, every instinct Naomi had was screaming that this wasn't coincidence.
What is
the
that?
wrong garnish.
It's a skull! Get
the
away
trembling
from it!
hands.
I'm getting out of here!
Park's discomfort. These weren't separate details. They were pieces of something bigger. Something planned. And if she was right, they had minutes, not hours, before it became irreversible. There was a rule in Park Dae-hyun's organization that everyone learned on day 1. No one touches the boss's plate. Not to adjust it. Not to move it. Not even to clear it until he gives the signal. The rule existed because in their world, trust was measured in millimeters, and the distance between loyalty and assassination was often just a hand reaching across a table. 3 months ago, a junior server at another restaurant had made the mistake of leaning over Park's shoulder to refill his water glass without asking. The kid was nervous, overeager, trying to be attentive. Park hadn't said a word. But 2 days later, the restaurant owner received a visit from Park's security, and the server was never seen again. The message was clear. Proximity without permission was a death sentence. Naomi knew this. She had seen it enforced. And right now, the only way to confirm her suspicion was to do the one thing that could get her killed. Touch his plate. Move it. Stop him from eating. But if she was wrong, if this was just paranoia, just coincidence, just a chef's harmless substitution, she wouldn't walk out of this room. Park didn't tolerate disrespect, and challenging his judgment in front of his men would be seen as exactly that. Disrespect. Insubordination. A foreigner overstepping her place. She glanced at the clock on the wall. 30 seconds had passed since the dish arrived. Park was still talking to Choi, still distracted by the conversation. His chopsticks were resting beside the plate. He would reach for them soon. And once he did, once he took the first bite, there would be no reversing whatever came next. Naomi's pulse quickened. Her tablet felt heavier in her hands. She could walk forward. She could speak. She could intervene. Or she could stay silent, stay safe, and let whatever was about to happen unfold without her fingerprints on it. Survival in this world meant knowing when to act and when to disappear. Naomi had survived 2 years by choosing the latter. By being invisible. By letting powerful men make their own choices and living with the consequences. But invisibility only worked when the consequences didn't matter. And if Park Dae-hyun died tonight, if he collapsed at this table because she chose silence over risk, she wouldn't just lose her job. She would lose the one person in this organization who had given her a chance when no one else would. Park's hand moved toward his chopsticks. The conversation was winding down. In 5 seconds, maybe less, he would take the first bite. And Naomi Brooks had to decide. Right now. In this moment. Whether survival meant staying silent, or breaking the one rule that kept everyone alive. Naomi moved before she could think about it. 3 steps forward, tablet still in her left hand, her right hand reaching for the small notepad she kept in her jacket pocket. She approached the table from Park's left side, the angle that kept her in his peripheral vision but didn't demand attention. Her face was neutral. Professional. The same expression she wore every time she needed to clarify a detail or confirm a timing. Nothing urgent. Nothing alarming. Just the assistant doing her job. She stopped beside Park's chair and leaned in slightly, just enough to place the notepad on the table near his elbow. Her voice was low, barely audible over the conversation still happening across from them. Sir, there's a call scheduled in 15 minutes. The contact in Osaka. It was a lie. There was no call. But it gave her a reason to be close. A reason to exist in his space without suspicion. Park glanced at the notepad, nodded once, and returned his attention to Choi, who was still explaining the Busan shipment delay. Naomi's hand moved. Not quickly. Not dramatically. Just a smooth, practiced motion as she adjusted the angle of the notepad, and in the same movement, her fingers grazed the edge of Park's plate. She shifted it. Just 2 inches to the left. And in the same breath, her other hand reached across and slid Lieutenant Kim's plate, identical dish, identical presentation, 2 inches to the right. The movement looked like she was making space. Clearing room for the notepad. Adjusting the table setting so Park could see the reminder she just placed down. No one stopped talking. No one looked up. The conversation flowed as if nothing had happened. Because to everyone else in that room, nothing had. Naomi stepped back, returned to her position near the wall, and watched. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears, but her face remained blank. Unreadable. She didn't look at Park. Didn't look at Kim. Didn't look at the plates. She looked at her tablet, scrolling through nothing, pretending to review schedules while her entire body screamed at her to run. Park reached for his chopsticks. He lifted a piece of abalone, brought it to his mouth, and chewed slowly. Across from him, Lieutenant Kim did the same. The room continued. Voices discussing territory, money, loyalty, business as usual. And Naomi stood there, silent, invisible, waiting. Waiting to see if she had just saved a man's life. Or signed her own death warrant. Because in this world, the truth didn't reveal itself immediately. It arrived later. Quietly. With consequences no one could reverse. 12 minutes passed. The third course was being cleared when Lieutenant Kim's chopsticks clattered against his plate. Not dropped. Not placed down. They fell. His hand went to his throat, fingers pressing against his collar, as if the fabric had suddenly become too tight. His breathing changed, short, shallow, labored. Someone asked if he was all right. Kim didn't answer. His face had gone pale, a sheen of sweat breaking across his forehead. Then his body jerked forward, and he vomited across the table. The room went silent. Not the controlled silence of respect. The kind of silence that happens when everyone realizes something is very, very wrong. Park stood immediately, stepping back from the table. 2 of his security men burst through the door before anyone called for them. They had been watching through the cameras. One moved to Kim's side, The other positioned himself between Park and the door. Protocol. Protect the boss first. Questions come later. Kim collapsed out of his chair, hitting the floor hard. His body convulsed once, twice, then went still. Someone shouted for a doctor. Another man was already on his phone. Naomi stayed where she was, tablet gripped so tightly her knuckles had gone white. She didn't move. Didn't speak. Didn't react. Because reacting meant drawing attention, and right now, the only thing keeping her alive was the fact that no one was looking at her. The medic arrived within 4 minutes, former military, kept on retainer for situations exactly like this. He worked quickly, checking vitals, pupils, pulse. Then he looked up at Park and said 2 words that changed everything. Poison. Definitely. The room exploded into controlled chaos. Phones came out. Orders were barked in rapid Korean. The restaurant was locked down, no one in, no one out. The kitchen staff was detained. The server who had brought the second course was already gone, slipped out during the confusion, which told everyone exactly what they needed to know. This wasn't an accident. This was an attempt. But the wrong man was on the floor. And slowly, inevitably, the realization began to spread through the room like a cold wind. Park Dae-hyun was supposed to be the one convulsing. The one dying. But he was standing. Breathing. Alive. Which meant something had changed. Someone had interfered. Eyes began to move. Scanning the table. The plates. The positions. And then, one by one, those eyes found Naomi. Still standing against the wall. Still silent. Still holding her tablet like nothing had happened. But everyone in that room now understood. She had done something. And whatever it was, it had saved Park's life. They didn't arrest her. Didn't question her. Didn't even speak to her. But within 2 minutes, one of Park's security men had positioned himself between Naomi and the door. Not blocking. Not threatening. Just present. Making it clear that leaving wasn't an option. The other lieutenants were arguing in rapid Korean, voices overlapping as they tried to piece together what had happened. Who had access to the kitchen? Who had approved the menu? Who had hired the server that disappeared? Someone suggested checking the security footage. Another man was already on the phone with the restaurant owner, his tone making it very clear that cooperation wasn't optional. Park said nothing. He stood near the window, hands clasped behind his back, watching the chaos unfold with the same calm he showed at every negotiation. But his eyes kept returning to Naomi. Not with anger. Not with suspicion. With something closer to curiosity. Like he was solving a puzzle, and she was the piece that didn't fit where it was supposed to. Lieutenant Choi approached him, speaking in low tones, gesturing toward the table. Park listened, nodded once, then raised his hand. The room went silent. He spoke one sentence in Korean. The security men nodded. The lieutenants filed out. The medics took Kim's body. And within 60 seconds, the room was empty except for Park, Naomi, and one guard stationed outside the door. Park turned to face her. His expression was unreadable. Not grateful. Not angry. Just measuring. He crossed the room slowly, stopping a few feet away, close enough that she had to look up to meet his eyes. And then he asked the question that would decide whether she lived or died. Why did you move it? Naomi didn't hesitate. Hesitation looked like guilt. She met his gaze directly and answered in Korean, her tone steady. The garnish was wrong. The server's hands were shaking. You touched your jaw after the plate arrived. I recognized the pattern. She paused, then added, I've seen this before. In Los Angeles. A client survived because someone noticed the details no one else did. That client taught me that survival isn't about waiting for certainty. It's about trusting your instincts before it's too late. Park studied her for a long moment. Then he asked, And if you were wrong? Naomi's answer came without flinching. Then I would be dead. But you would still be alive. That seemed like an acceptable trade. It wasn't loyalty. It wasn't devotion. It was calculation. And Park understood calculation better than anyone. The security footage told the story Park needed to see. The server who delivered the poison dish had entered through the kitchen's back entrance at 7:43 p.m., wearing a legitimate Jade Pro uniform, carrying legitimate credentials. But he wasn't on the restaurant's payroll. He had been inserted 3 days ago by someone who had access to staff schedules, supplier lists, and most importantly, Park's confirmed reservation. This wasn't opportunistic. This was coordinated. And coordination at this level required inside information. Park's head of security, a man named Han, had been with him for 11 years. Han controlled access to Park's schedule. Han approved vendors. Han vetted every location before Park entered it. And Han had been in the room tonight, standing near the back wall, watching the dinner unfold. But when they pulled Han's phone records, the pattern became clear. 4 calls to an unlisted number in the past week. Wire transfers to an offshore account in Singapore. And most damning, a message sent at 7:39 p.m., 4 minutes before the poison dish arrived, that read simply, "Proceed." The coup wasn't just about killing Park. It was about timing. If Park died at dinner, surrounded by his lieutenants, there would be chaos. Suspicion. Accusations. And while everyone scrambled to assign blame, Han would step in. Calm. Authoritative. The man who had been loyal for over a decade. The man everyone trusted to stabilize the situation. He would take temporary control, consolidate power, and by the time anyone realized what had happened, it would be too late to stop him. But Naomi had moved the plate. And when Lieutenant Kim collapsed instead of Park, the timing shattered. The plan required Park's death to trigger the transition. Without it, Han couldn't move. Couldn't claim authority. Couldn't justify the takeover. He had to wait. And waiting gave Park time to investigate. Time to see the phone records. Time to realize that the person he trusted most had been planning his death for months. When they brought Han into the room, he didn't deny it. Didn't beg. Just looked at Park with something close to resignation and said, "It should have worked." Park's response was quieter than Naomi expected. "It would have. If my assistant had stayed silent." Han's eyes moved to Naomi then, and for the first time, she saw fear in them. Not fear of Park. Fear of her. Because she had done something no one anticipated. She had noticed. She had acted. And she had dismantled an 11-year plan with one move. Park dismissed Han with a single gesture. The security men escorted him out. And when the door closed, Park turned back to Naomi and said something she hadn't expected. "You didn't save me because you're loyal. You saved me because you needed me alive." It wasn't an accusation. It was respect. 3 weeks later, Park Dae-hyun held another private dinner. Different restaurant. Different security protocols. Different guests. But Naomi Brooks was still standing near the back wall, tablet in hand, observing. Except this time, when she entered the room, conversation paused. Just for a second. Just long enough for every man at that table to acknowledge that she existed. That she mattered. That the invisible woman who had saved their boss's life was no longer someone they could afford to ignore. Her title hadn't changed. Executive assistant. Logistics coordinator. Schedule manager. But the way people spoke to her had shifted. Security consulted her on venue selections. Lieutenants confirmed details with her before presenting proposals to Park. Even the restaurant staff treated her differently. Head chef personally reviewing the menu with her, servers making eye contact, asking if the arrangements met her approval. She hadn't asked for the power. Hadn't demanded respect. But in a world where survival was currency, she had proven she knew how to spend it wisely. The first course arrived. Seared scallops with yuzu foam. Simple. Elegant. Pre-approved. Park's plate was set in front of him with the same practiced precision as always. But this time, he didn't reach for his chopsticks immediately. Didn't engage in conversation. Didn't dismiss the moment as routine. Instead, his eyes moved across the room and found Naomi. Just a glance. Just a silent question. And Naomi, without hesitation, gave the smallest nod. Permission. Confirmation. The signal that said everything was as it should be. Only then did Park lift his chopsticks. Only then did the dinner continue. And everyone at that table understood what had just happened. Park Dae-hyun, the untouchable king, the man who controlled an empire spanning 3 countries, the man who had survived assassination attempts, territory wars, and betrayals that would have destroyed lesser men, had just deferred to his assistant. Not out of fear. Not out of obligation. But out of recognition. Because power in their world wasn't just about who gave orders. It was about who you trusted when your life was on the line. Naomi returned her attention to her tablet, scrolling through schedules, confirming logistics, doing the job she had always done. But she wasn't invisible anymore. She was essential. And in that world, power didn't belong to the man who ordered the meal, but to the one who knew when to move. If you made it this far, thank you, seriously. That tells me these stories matter to you. Would you have moved the plate? Would you have risked everything to save someone who might not have even known you existed? Comment move if you would have acted like Naomi, or comment silent if survival meant staying invisible. Where are you watching from? And what would you have done if you were in that room? If you haven't subscribed yet, please do it now. It's how this channel survives, and it means more than you think. Next week, we're covering a story about a bodyguard who disappeared for 48 hours, and when she returned, her client's entire family was gone. Until then, remember, sometimes the most dangerous move is the one no one sees coming.